Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA Karen Reddit stories. In this Ripestories video, I came home a day early from a weekend trip to find 30 strangers in my pool, beer from my fridge in hand, music blasting, because an HOA Karen told them my property was a shared community asset and charged them $50 each. Here is how I dealt with these trespassing homeowner association members. And the first one is titled, I caught an HOA Karen swimming in my pool, but I am no HOA member. So my wife and I spent months looking for the right house. We had a very strict list of requirements for our real estate agent, and right at the very top of that list, in bold lettering, was a rule that we would not buy a house in a neighborhood with a homeowner association. I've read way too many horror HOA stories online to ever subject myself to that kind of neighborhood politics. I really just wanted a quiet place where I could relax, hang out with my two cats, and not have someone breathing down my neck about the height of my grass or the color of my mailbox. Eventually, we found the perfect spot. It was a beautiful, spacious property sitting right on the edge of a very large suburban development. The backyard was the main selling point for us. The previous owners had invested a ton of money into landscaping. It had a massive luxury pool, a built-in grilling station on the patio, and a tall privacy fence wrapping around the entire back perimeter. It was basically a private oasis. Before we put in an offer, I double-checked the property lines and the city zoning maps to be absolutely sure. But yeah, the large subdivision next to us did have a very strict established HOA, however our property was technically zoned as part of the older original county road that predated the subdivision. Our right side fence physically touched the HOA neighborhood's common green space, but our property was undeniably separate. We were not part of their jurisdiction. We bought the house, moved in, and spent the first few weeks unpacking and enjoying our new pool with our white cats lounging in the window. It didn't take long for the neighborhood dictator to introduce herself though. I was in the garage breaking down moving boxes when a woman walked up the driveway. She had a stiff haircut, an annoyed expression, and was clutching a heavy clipboard to her chest like it was a shield. She didn't introduce herself politely either. She just marched up to me and shoved a thick, glossy folder into my hands. "You missed a monthly board meeting," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm the president of the community association. This folder has all the community bylaws, the approved paint color swatches, and the schedule for your monthly dues. Since you moved in late, I am waiving your late fee for this month, but I expect a check by Friday." I looked at the folder, then back up at her. I gave her a polite smile and then spit on the never mind, that didn't happen, and handed the folder right back. "I think you have the wrong house," I told her. "We are not part of the HOA, we are zoned to the county road, we don't owe any dues, and we don't follow the bylaws." She didn't take the folder, she just crossed her arms and glared at me. "Your property line touches our community greenbelt. That means your home has been assimilated into the association borders. It is a shared community boundary. You're a part of this neighborhood, which means you pay dues and you follow my rules." I actually laughed out loud because I thought she was joking. When her expression didn't change, I realized she was completely serious. She truly believed that she could just annex my house because she felt like it. That's not how real estate works," I said calmly. "I own the deed to this property, and there's no HOA clause in my closing paperwork. Please take your folders and leave my driveway, and I have a lot of boxes to flatten." And by the way, guys, is it just me, or does anybody else wish the HOA presidents would get flattened as well? Anyway, I dropped the glossy folder on the hood of her car and walked back into my garage, hitting the button to close the door. I watched her stand there in disbelief as the door lowered. I figured that would be the end of it. I mean, I had set a firm boundary here, and she would realize that she had no power over me, right? Well, I was very wrong about this. This woman was completely incapable of accepting the word no. Over the next few months, the harassment started slowly. I would go out to my driveway and find official-looking printed notices on my front door. They were always signed by the HOA president. The first one claimed that my mailbox was not the approved color. I threw it in the trash can. A week later, another notice arrived claiming my grass was a half-inch over the required limit and threatening a fine. That also went into the trash can. Then I got a notice claiming that because my white cat was sitting in the front window, I was in violation of a rule regarding unauthorized neighborhood surveillance. It was completely unhinged. I ignored every single piece of paper she left for me. Summer was approaching and the weather was getting incredibly hot. My wife and I spent most of our weekends lounging by our pool, enjoying the privacy of our backyard. We kept the side gate locked with a standard padlock, mostly for security, and one afternoon I walked out to the end of my driveway to get the mail, and mixed in with the bills and junk mail was a folded neighborhood newsletter. I usually throw these straight into the trash bin, but the bold headline caught my attention. It read, "Exciting news! New community shared asset now open for summer." I opened the newsletter and started reading, and my stomach completely dropped. The newsletter announced that the HOA board had successfully secured a community pool for all paying members. It listed the pool hours as 8 AM to 8 PM on weekends, and it also stated that because maintenance was expensive, there would be a mandatory $50 summer access fee per household payable directly in cash to the HOA president. The address listed for the new community pool was my address. She had actually printed out directions to my house and told the entire neighborhood that my backyard was a public park and was actively charging people money to trespass on my property. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless for a full minute. She actually thought she could just declare my private luxury pool a community asset just because my fence touched her precious greenbelt. Well, I grabbed the newsletter and walked straight over to the HOA president's house. I knocked heavily on the door. And by the way, guys, if you would have been in this situation, what would you have done? I mean, this Karen is literally giving an invitation to dozens of people, or maybe hundreds of people, to literally trespass on OP's property. I would say I would have instantly gone to the cops, but let me know in the comments what you would have suggested OP to do, and also I would very much appreciate it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, and maybe post a comment if you want to help me with the algorithm. Thank you so much. Karen opened the door, looked at the newsletter in my hand, and gave me a very smug grin. "I see you've got the community update," she said before I could even speak. "I expect your backyard to be clean and the pool chemicals balanced by Saturday morning. We have a lot of families eager to swim." "Are you completely out of your mind?" I asked, holding the paper up. "This is my private home. You do not own my pool and you cannot invite people to my house. You definitely can't charge people money to use something that you don't even own." She just rolled her eyes and sighed loudly, acting like I was a stubborn child throwing a tantrum or something. "Your fence borders the community property. That makes your yard a shared asset. The community needs a pool and you are being incredibly selfish, trying to hoard it all to yourself. I'm the president and I made a board decision. You need to be a team player here." I looked her dead in the eye and delivered the clearest warning I possibly could. I said, "Listen to me very carefully. I'm not in your HOA. I own the deed to my house, and if you or anyone from your neighborhood steps foot on my property, you will be trespassing. I will not give any warnings. I will call the cops immediately and press charges on you. Don't test me." She scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "The police don't care about neighborhood disputes. Stop being difficult." "We will be there on Saturday." She slammed the door in my face. I walked back home. My blood was boiling. I knew she was arrogant, but I didn't think she was actually stupid enough to follow through with it. Well guys, never underestimate an HOA Karen. However, I was not gonna take any chances here. The next day I went to the local hardware store. I bought a chain and a combination padlock, and I also purchased 3 small motion-activated security cameras. I spent the afternoon installing the cameras around the perimeter of my backyard, making sure they had a clear view of the pool, the patio, and the side gate. I wrapped the new chain around the side gate and locked it tight. That Friday, my wife and I had planned to drive a couple hours away to visit some friends for the weekend. We packed our bags, loaded up the car, and hit the road early. We had a great time catching up with our friends, but by Saturday afternoon, my wife started feeling a bit under the weather. She had a headache and just wanted to sleep in her own bed. So we decided to cut the trip short and drive back home a day early. It was the best decision we could have possibly made. We pulled onto our street around 3 in the afternoon, and the entire block was lined with parked cars. I had to carefully navigate my way up to my own driveway because vehicles were parked haphazardly on the curbs and partially blocking my property. I turned the engine off and just sat there in the driver's seat for a moment. I could hear the music before I even opened my car door. It was loud, thumping bass echoing from my backyard. I could hear people shouting, splashing and laughing, and my wife looked at me, her eyes wide. She actually did it. "Stay in the car," I told her. "Keep the doors locked," and I walked up the driveway and headed straight for the side path that led to my backyard gate. As I got closer, I saw exactly how they got in. The chain I bought was lying in the grass, completely severed. Someone had brought bolt cutters to my house and destroyed my property to break in. I stepped through the open gate and surveyed the absolute chaos. There were at least 30 people in my backyard, kids were screaming and doing cannonballs into the deep end. A group of men were standing by my built-in grilling station holding cans of beer that they had definitely taken from the outdoor mini fridge that I keep stocked for myself. And right there, sitting under an umbrella by the patio entrance, was the HOA president. She had a small folding table set up, and she was holding a cash box, chatting with a neighbor and acting like she owned the entire world. She looked up and saw me standing by the gate. For a split second, a look of panic flashed across her face because she knew I was supposed to be out of town, but her arrogance quickly took over. She stood up, smoothed down her shirt, and marched over to me. "You're supposed to be gone," she demanded loudly. "We have paying members utilizing the shared asset today. You're interrupting the community schedule. I'm going to have to ask you to go back inside your house and stay out of the way until pool hours are over at 8. I remained completely and utterly calm, which I think confused her more than anything else. "Okay," I said quietly. I turned around, stepped back through the side gate, and pulled it shut behind me. I reached into my pocket. Earlier that week, I had found an extra heavy-duty U-lock in my garage from an old bicycle, and I brought it with me just in case. I slipped a thick metal U-lock through the latch mechanism of the gate, clicked it firmly into place, and spun the combination dial. The only way out of my backyard now was to go through my locked house or climb a very tall, smooth wooden privacy fence that had 0 footholds. I just trapped 30 trespassing strangers in my backyard. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency police number. I calmly explained to the dispatcher that I had a massive group of trespassers who had destroyed my property to break in beforehand. I mentioned I had secured the gate from the outside for my own physical safety because the crowd was large and drinking, and I didn't want them rushing me on my own property. The dispatcher advised me not to engage with them and just wait by the street for the officers to arrive. I stood at the end of my driveway, leaning against my car, and I waited. About 10 minutes later, I heard the heavy rattling of the iron gate. Someone was pulling on it, and then I heard a muffled shout. A few minutes after that, the loud music in the backyard suddenly cut off. 3 police cruisers turned onto my street and parked behind my car. 4 officers got out and approached me, and I introduced myself. I explained the entire situation from the beginning. I told them about the fake fines, the newsletter, the bolt cutters, and the cash box. "They are all in the back," I told the officers. I locked the gate so they couldn't rush me. "I want them all formally trespassed from my property, and I want the organizer charged for breaking my lock." The officers nodded. We walked up the side path together, and when we reached the gate, there was a crowd of angry, wet people pushing against it. The HOA president was right at the front, her face red with anger and rage. When she saw the cops, she immediately started pointing her finger at me through the bars. "Arrest him!" she shrieked at the officers. "He locked us in! He is holding paying HOA members hostage. This is a community asset and he's harassing us. Arrest him right now!" The lead officer stepped forward and put his hand on the gate. He looked through the bars at the furious woman. "Ma'am, please step back," the officer ordered. "No, you need to do your job," she yelled back. "I'm the president of this HOA. This is shared property. He has no right to lock this gate." "Ma'am, this is private property. You're not on HOA land." "You are currently trespassing on private property. Every single person in this yard is trespassing." "What do you mean private property?" one of the men near the grill asked loudly. "Karen told us the HOA took over this yard. I paid her $50 for access today." "Hey, I paid her $50 too," a woman yelled from the back. "She said the board authorized it." The HOA president started stammering. All of her false authority completely vanished in an instant. She looked at the angry crowd surrounding her and then looked back at the officers. "It's a shared boundary," she tried to argue. Her voice was shaking now. "The fence touches our greenbelt. It's a technicality." "Ma'am, it is not a technicality," the officer interrupted firmly. "It is breaking and entering." "Did you cut the lock on this gate?" "I had to," she cried, playing the victim immediately. "He locked a community asset and the neighborhood needed a pool. It is not fair that he gets to keep this massive yard all to himself while the rest of the neighborhood suffers in the heat. I was doing a service for my community." The officer just shook his head. He turned to me and asked me to unlock the gate. I put in the combination, removed the U-lock and pulled the gate open. The officers instructed everyone to exit the yard slowly and line up on the sidewalk in front of my house. It was an incredible sight. Dozens of people, dripping wet, carrying pool noodles and half-empty beer cans, doing a massive walk of shame down my driveway under the watchful eyes of the police. Once everyone was on the sidewalk, the lead officer made an announcement. He informed the crowd that they were all officially trespassed from my property, and if any of them stepped foot on my grass again, they would be arrested immediately. And then the crowd turned on the HOA president. "Give me my money back right now," a large man demanded, stepping right up to her. "I want my $50 too." Another woman chimed in. "You lied to all of us, you made us break the law." The HOA president was backed against a police cruiser, clutching her cash box to her chest. She looked completely terrified. "The money goes to the HOA general fund, I cannot just give refunds. It has to go through the proper channels," the lead officer told the crowd. "Any money changing hands is a civil matter, but you all need to vacate this property right now." But the angry neighbors were not leaving without their cash. They practically formed a barricade around her on the sidewalk, and with nowhere to run and 30 furious people screaming at her, she frantically fumbled with the tiny key to her cash box. She had to hand back every single $50 bill she had collected just to get them to back off. The officer stood back and kept the peace while she was publicly humiliated in front of her entire neighborhood. People were calling her names, telling her she was insane, and demanding she resign from the board immediately. When the cash box was finally empty, the police pulled her aside. I provided the officers with the security footage from my phone, which clearly showed her walking up to my gate with bolt cutters and snapping my chain. She cried. She actually stood there on the sidewalk and cried, claiming her life was ruined and she only wanted everyone to have a nice summer. Nobody comforted her. Now, weeks later, I sit by my pool in complete peace. The HOA board leaves me completely alone, and my cats can look out the sunroom window whenever they please. Edit, I forgot to mention, Karen ended up having to pay a heavy fine for destroying my property, since some of you were asking me about it in the comments. To be honest guys, I'm kind of baffled that the HOA Karen didn't face any severe charges and got away with all of this with just a heavy fine. I mean, she essentially organized a mass trespassing event and defrauded her neighbors out of $50 each. But then again, I would say this was one of the ultimate FAFO moments when OP locked these entitled HOA trespassers into his property. It seriously reminded me of the last time when I played The Sims. And now let's read some comments about the story from Reddit. The first one said, "OP, you did the right thing. I cannot fathom the sheer audacity of someone printing out flyers, cutting a padlock with bolt cutters, and setting up a cash box on someone else's patio. She literally tried to monetize your private property, so you handled this perfectly. Also, I really enjoyed that she had to refund all these people." Another Reddit comment said, "You are the a-hole here, and honestly, you sound incredibly selfish and exhausting to live next to. But yes, technically, you own the deed, but we live in a society. You bought a house right next to a community that clearly lacks adequate recreational facilities for its children, and instead of being a good neighbor and coming to a compromise, you hoarded a massive luxury pool all to yourself. The HOA president was just trying to do something nice for the families in the summer heat." And another, more reasonable Reddit comment said, "Not the a-hole, and I'm honestly baffled at anyone saying otherwise. I mean, you explicitly told this woman multiple times that she had no authority over your property, and you warned her in advance that you would call the police." And yeah guys, let me know in the comments what you think about this, whether OP was the a-hole or not. And the next one is an amazing malicious compliance story, which is titled "The Accidental Malicious Compliance Against the World Expert." This occurred back in the 70s, and before I start, I want to emphasize I was never stupid enough and will never be stupid enough to use my hidden talent. So for some background, I was taking an elective criminal forensic (CSI stuff) night course at a local community college. The best part about taking this course was the instructor, which meant an in-depth tour at the US. To be specific, the US Criminal Forensic Lab, where he worked as the question document examiner, in other words, handwriting analysis, signature matching, and so on. Also, since the computers were barely introduced into forensics at this time, all handwriting analysis and matching was done by hand, and this instructor was one of, if not the best in the world. The MC, as good as I remember, it was a great course studying many facets of criminal forensics and taking the amazing lab tour. As the course was coming to the end, the question document facet approached and the instructor's specialty. At the end of the class, just before it started, the instructor wrote a paragraph on the board, and we each had 2 sheets of blank lined paper. He told us to write the paragraph, only the paragraph, any way we want on one sheet and then again on the other, trying to disguise our handwriting. "You're committing forgery." The instructor left and we all started writing. When done, one student, not me, collected all the sheets, mixed them up and took them to the instructor. We all looked forward to the next class where the instructor would present the matched sheets and then explain to us why our forgery attempts failed and how he would testify in court to prove it. Because I wanted to go home, I made it easy on myself. For my forgery attempt, I wrote the paragraph in print on one sheet and in cursive on the other sheet, even though we were told that it is a failed way to disguise handwriting. Now, for a little background on my handwriting, it is bad, and I mean really bad. I've held pencils and pens wrong since I learned to write. The easiest way to explain it is I write with a closed fist right-handed. In elementary school, my parents hired a tutor to try to teach me to write again from scratch, including putting plastic things on pencils to make my preferred grip uncomfortable, but it failed miserably. In high school, I had a teacher tell me that I would amount to nothing because I had issues writing legibly. Basically, my print is somewhat legible and my cursive, good luck, but that should make no difference, right? Now back to the story. At the beginning of the next class, the normal happy-go-lucky instructor looked very upset as he walked in. The first words out of his mouth was if anyone played a practical joke on him, he didn't appreciate it. The whole class, 15 students, looked at each other totally confused, and the instructor then again tried to get someone to confess, but we all continued to look confused. The instructor calmed down a little and decided to continue with the class as he would normally have done so. From the stack of papers he was handed at the end of last class, he picked out the top 2 sheets and said, in court speak, how he deduced that the same person wrote both paragraphs. Then a student would admit it was their failed forgery attempt, and the instructor would continue with the next 2 sheets. When there were just 2 sheets left, the instructor lifted them all up for the class to see. Looking straight at me, he said he couldn't testify in court saying the same person wrote both paragraphs. With a scared look on my face, I said both sheets were mine and I wrote both paragraphs. So in front of the instructor and the whole class, I again wrote the paragraph, once in print and once in cursive. The instructor walked away shaking his head and mumbling something like he had never seen this before. After that, the instructor looked at and spoke to me differently as my classmates created some obvious nicknames for me. For example, the forger. I got an A in the class and was very happy when it ended. And the next one is a malicious compliance story which is titled, Sorry, I did not litter. So I recently started walking to work for some more exercise, and walking with an empty drink bottle reminded me of a situation from high school. Be me, circa 2002. I'm just walking home from high school with one of my friends that lived nearby, and I had just finished drinking a Gatorade or something like that. It happened to be recycling day the next day, and a random dude had his bins out early. I opened his recycling bin and tossed the bottle in thinking, hey, I'm doing my part. Well, the guy, an older dude, must have been looking out his front window or something and comes out to yell at me for effing with his recycling bin. I apologized, walked back and threw the bottle in his lawn. He started yelling at me some more, but my friend and I just kept walking. What an insane thing to be mad about. And yeah guys, please check out my playlist on the left if you want more stories, and I will see you again tomorrow.